Welcome to the channel Learn with Danish. Subscribe and hit the bell icon. Hello all. Welcome to the video lecture series of literary criticism and theory. We had been focusing the school of criticism that is known as structuralism in our previous two videos. In the previous video, we had discussed about the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure and his theories associated with language. In this video, I would be concentrating on the Belgium-born French intellect Claude Levi Strauss in particular. And one more thing, this video would be divided into two parts as such because of the length that it consumes. So let us just get into the video. In the previous video, we had discussed the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure and how his theorization of language actually laid the ground for the principles of a structuralist school of criticism. However, Saussure's work is almost entirely a kind of a commentary on how language works as a system of structure. And there was no apparent method how this theorization of language by Ferdinand de Saussure could apply in literary narratives. So he didn't actually focus on literary narratives, but rather he focused on a whole as a language, as a structure. So in this lecture, I would be focusing on a person who associates the theories of Ferdinand de Saussure within the literary narrative. And I'm talking of the Belgium-born French intellect Claude Levi Strauss. Claude Levi Strauss was in fact not a literary critic. He was an anthropologist by profession. He was born in 1908 and he died in 2009. So almost 101 years that he lived. And during this large span of life, he taught both in America as well as in France. And indeed, it was in America that he meets Roman Jakobson, the Russian formalist that we had discussed in our video, Russian Formalism, that he meets Russian formalist Roman Jakobson during the wake of the Second World War. We see that many European critics actually had a continental drift from Europe to America during the Second World War. And when we look at America in the mid-20th century, it was considered to be a melting pot of intellectual critics or intellectual powerhouse as such. Roman Jakobson actually deeply influenced Claude Levi Strauss' way of thinking. It was, in fact, Roman Jakobson's influence that made Claude Levi Strauss turn into what is known as structuralism and allowed him to take this school of thought as a tool to analyze human society. Anyway, with the end of the Second World War, Claude Levi Strauss returned back to France. And he became a celebrated anthropologist in France, especially after publishing his memoir, Triste Tropique, which actually is detailed of his travels in the Amazonian rainforest, as well as his ethnographic study of the native tribes in the Amazonian rainforest. Apart from being an anthropologist, Claude Levi Strauss is important to us. He expanded the theories of Ferdinand de Saussure and gave it a wider socio-cultural relevance. That's the first reason. The second reason that he is important for us is that he used Saussure's insight to produce a kind of structuralist analysis of myths. This structuralist analysis of myth was considered to be a classic example of analyzing literary narratives as such. So we would be analyzing one classic example that he comes up with related to myth, and that is the Oedipal myth. One of the greatest arguments that Claude Levi Strauss make was that the socio-cultural existence of human being was underlined by a deep-rooted grammar. And in this argument, he was actually borrowing the concept of langue and parole that was put forward by Ferdinand de Saussure. So according to Saussure, the largest structure is langue, and the concrete language uses that is guided by this structure as parole. So according to Levi-Strauss, this langue and parole distinction can be extended to encompass the socio-cultural human existence as such. And all major aspects of human socio-cultural life, according to Levi-Strauss, are underlined by a deep-rooted structure or regulations which structure human experience, just like the langue within a language structure parole. Levi-Strauss exemplifies this by showing how, for example, the kinship structure that locates us within a society are guided by a set of regulations that might be identified as an underlying social grammar. And this was a very important piece of argument that Claude Levi Strauss had put forward. Keeping this kinship structure aside, Levi-Strauss is also famously known for his analysis of myths. And those analyses are really very important from our perspective. Because according to Levi-Strauss, myths are the language which helps humans, or at least the ones that he calls as primitive men, to articulate various aspects of his existence in society. And by providing him this possibility, he actually creates a negotiation of him being in this world in a better sense. In other words, myths are paroles which are underlined by a set of rules, a kind of a deep-seated grammar or a deep-seated langue. So the underlying deep-rootedness of the myths actually structures the worldview of human beings, and also the ways in which the human beings conceptualize the positions that they hold in society and within their surrounding environment. The way myths structure the human worldview or structure the human mind cannot be understood by merely listening to individual narration of a particular myth, because they are what Saussure would call paroles. To understand the structuring aspects of the myth, we would need to go into the deep-rootedness of the mythical structure at large. We need to go to the mythic langue as such. Now we need to know what the Oedipus myth is. The explanation of this Oedipus myth with the distinction of langue and parole is actually seen in his essay titled as The Structural Study of Myth. So Oedipus myth is not actually just important in the structuralist perspective of Claude Levi Strauss, but also when I take up psychoanalytic criticism of Sigmund Freud, he also expanded this particular myth into his theorization of psychoanalysis. So this myth is actually important in order to know the two schools of criticism. With that, we come to the end of the first part of Claude Levi Strauss. In the next part, we would be discussing the myth and how Claude Levi Strauss focus on its analysis in the structuralistic perspective. So till then, it's me, Danish, signing off. Have a good day. Learn with Danish.